First of all, thanks everyone for your attendance this morning and taking the time. Should be a really interesting session. My name is Kyle Peterson. I'm the Vice President of Customer Success. Really interesting case study here today. Ginny and Steve from Chickasaw, they have some slides, but they're actually going to get into the software itself. So you should get a really good look at the X's and O's of how they're doing this. And ultimately, it's in keeping with our customer success team's ethos of kind of managing and telling customer stories. So really excited to be here. A few logistical notes, and then we'll get it kicked off. The slides and the recordings will be shared with registrants. Please do use the Q&A box. We'll go through Q&A at the end. And then I think that is all of the homework stuff to get to. So I'll introduce Emily Mann. She's a customer success manager. She's worked with Ginny and Steve at Chickasaw, a great example of collaboration there. So Emily, if you could introduce Steve and Ginny, we'll get this kicked off.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Kyle. So as Kyle mentioned, my name is Emily Mahon. I'm a customer success manager here at VisibleThread, and I work very closely with both Steve and Ginny and the rest of the Chickasaw team to really understand how VT Docs can bring as much value as possible to them and their team. So Steve Skelton is the Capture Director at Chickasaw, and Ginny Carson is the VP of Proposal and Capture Management. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic over to Steve and Ginny, and we will get things kicked off today.
Thanks, Emily. This is Ginny. What a great introduction. We do really have a strong partnership with our friends at VisibleThread. We meet periodically and assess how the tool is working for us in its current function, and we review additional aspects of the tool that we might bring to bear to improve our efficiency and our quality at Chickasaw through the proposal shop. So the specific risk reduction tactic that we're going to talk about today is what we call in-house at DE&I, or Chickasaw Nation Industries. We call this our shred process. And this shred process was in place prior to my arrival at Chickasaw. I came on board through a reorg that was initiated in October of 2020. And the shred process was already underway. They were using different tools for it. They had tried several different tools. And so my role was really about optimizing something that was already there. We have had some confusion in the proposal community and even on our team about calling it a shred process. We kept that language because that's what it was called at CNI many years. But sometimes in the proposal world, we talk about a shred where we create a compliance matrix. Or a capability matrix, but that's not the function that we're talking about today. What we're talking about is the activity that we take on at the initiation of a proposal effort. When the RFP drops, we run the entire batch of RFP documents through the VisibleThread tool so that we can assess certain keywords or phrases and have those keywords and phrases which we've predetermined as important to us reviewed by the right parties in our shared services team. So that would be our tax team or legal, accounting. There's certain keywords and phrases that they look for. And this way, because of the high volume of proposals, we don't have to, and we don't know when they're gonna hit, right? We may get like 3 or 4 in a week, or we may get 10 in a week or 10 in 2 weeks. So that's, that allows us to help our friends in the shared services team look at the documents more carefully and assess just for what is important from their own perspective. So the process is up here on the screen. If we can go to that slide, the second slide, yep. So we receive and upload the RFP to VisibleThread. Then we use the responsibility matrix function. And we've already preloaded the dictionaries of the keywords that are important to each of these parties who are reviewing it. And then we process out a file, and we're going to show you the nuts and bolts of this in just a second. And then there's an email that goes out with the file that gives the fund of basics about the actual opportunity, who's the customer, things that are going to be important around a risk framework for that opportunity through the proposal development process. And we attach all of the RFP documents as well. So what I want to talk about just high level is the prior state and then what our friends at VisibleThread have helped us do to optimize the process. So the prior state of this function of proposal shredding, we'll go to slide, yeah, thank you. There was a single proposal coordinator who was the only person who was running these shreds for the team. And that meant that that person's volume of work, and there were many other tasks laid on that person beyond running the shred process. They may have to do, as I said a moment ago, a batch of these all at once. We had no control over systematically timing them in such a way that that was a manageable effort. And then that proposal manager was also responsible for creating that table that gave the funda basics about the opportunity. And that proposal coordinator would run the documents through each dictionary. So this is where there was a huge value add through working with VisibleThread. Let's say there were 12 different dictionaries. That proposal coordinator had to run the documents through 12 times and then build out a Excel workbook that had 12 tabs for the reviewers to look at. This person ended up running the shreds after hours just because it was too hard to do this process in the midst of other tasks throughout the day, which meant that both there was a burden on the individual that I felt like was too much, and it was delaying the shreds getting out the door, which meant the reviewers had less time to review and respond before questions might be due to the government, for example. Additionally, those early days, we were not identifying an owner for each dictionary. So it was just sort of like a big batch of like, hey, these might be risks in this proposal. And because we didn't give any instructions with the email that it went out with, there was a lot of reply all chatter with no directive action requested. So there might be like, ooh, did you see this thing on page 8 of the RFP? Oh, I've never seen that before. And then the reply all would just spin a little bit out of control from there. So it was, frankly, one of the things I was most keen after was to wrangle in those discussions, because as the proposal manager's working the effort to pull a proposal together based on the RFP, they needed to be able to differentiate what is just noise and chatter and what is actually something that we must deal with and take care of before we move forward with this bid. So moving to the next slide, our present state of the proposal shred, we have 2 proposal team members who have access and expertise to run the VT shreds. So that's usually me. I usually do it. I like to see all of the RFPs as they're coming in. But if I'm sick or on vacation, like next week, Steve can run that for me. And if, same if I'm overcome with other tasks, I can ask Steve to run the shred through VisibleThread. So having 2 of us is a nice lift of the burden. And then the way in which we do it makes it a lot easier as well. So even if one person was doing all of it, it wouldn't be the same scenario that we described with the proposal coordinator. The individual proposal managers put together what we call the shred email and the table with that funda basic information about the opportunity. They know this deal. They've likely touched the deal pre-RFP, so they're much better equipped. And it's actually a good check and balance for them when the RFP comes in to go through those fundamentals about the opportunity and make sure that everything ticks and tacks as we expected. The dictionaries are now all consolidated into one workbook. So we only have to push that button one time, and the VisibleThread tool kicks out a robust document instead of running it through every dictionary 12 times. And now our dictionaries have defined owners. So tax knows what they're looking at, accounting knows what they're looking at, legal knows what they are looking at. And we give really specific instructions in the email about who to contact and how to structure your comment or question so that we can quickly turn around and notify operations or compose a question to be posted back to our government POC during the Q&A period. So a great simplification of the effort and then some refinement in terms of the communication that allows us to have more actionable, definitive discussion about what's going on. And at this point, I'd like to hand it over to Steve, who's going to really do some demonstration of what I've just touched on at a high level.
Great. Thanks, Jenny. So I wanted to talk a little bit about and demonstrate a little bit about the way that things used to be. So when we talked about the old way of doing things, the shred would get run on each dictionary, and each dictionary would output in a compliance matrix spreadsheet with a tab. And so once you ran all of the dictionaries, the next step would be to combine them. And so you had a tab for each dictionary, but it was also one of these documents for each document in the RFP. So if you had 5 RFP documents, you'd be running 12 times 5, and it was just a time suck. And it was frustrating for everybody involved, and it just wasn't feasible. So what we moved to was more of a consolidated. So now we have the dictionaries that are all combined into one, and they run down across each document, and each document is output into a tab. And what I'm going to do now, and then the relevant folks can go through and say, if you want to see all the COI stuff, you can filter out everything but COI and only see what's relevant against the COI language that's a COI dictionary, which we've got set here. And the owner of that dictionary, Jenny, on a semi-regular basis, correct, goes through and makes sure that all the relevant information is in there.
Yep, at least annually, we are proactively sending the dictionaries to the individuals and asking them to reconfirm or add or edit. But I also get edits throughout the year as things come up, changes in the FAR, whatever the case may be. And it's so easy for you or me to jump into the master dictionary and make that edit. I love being able to go right back to Carrie, for example, and say, yep, we've added that. That'll be present in the next shred.
Yeah, and it's super quick. If there's 1 or 2 ads, you can do it right in VisibleThread, and I'll show you that. And if there's multiple ads, you can add them in bulk to the spreadsheet and then re-upload the dictionary as a new version. It's very straightforward. So let's go ahead and go over to VisibleThread. We'll talk about running the shred, and then I'll show you how to edit the dictionary as well. Actually, let me show you how to edit the dictionary while we're still on that topic. So if you go over to dictionaries, and then you go to the dictionary that you want to edit, it's as simple as clicking on it, waiting until your single sign-on logs you back in, and then clicking on it again, apparently. And then just going straight here to edit, and you're able to edit the dictionary and the category, and it's very straightforward. And you can add new terms, you can add new categories right from here. And this is also where you import. And then we're just going to cancel that edit because I didn't want to make any changes.
Thanks, Steve. I've got a shred to run right after this call.
Good. And then we're going to move on to showing the shred itself. So I've gone ahead and preloaded a number of documents from the CIOS before solicitation, just to show, rather than spend the time uploading and letting it process, I wanted to make sure that we had these up. So when we run the shred, we create a folder, and it's usually opportunity name, opportunity number. We come in here and we select the top level folder, and all we do is just have to click create responsibility matrix, and it'll run it on all of the documents in that folder, or any subset of them as you choose here. And then you just click next. We run it on a paragraph level. As you'll see in our next slide, when we talk about future state, there is an option to have macros in here. We've run them successfully before, but as we've worked with VisibleThread to build and improve them, we got too fancy. We flew too close to the sun, and it broke. So we're working with VisibleThread right now to fix that. So fortunately, the functionality that we'll talk about on the next slide is going to be back in our hands shortly. Then you just click Generate Matrix, and it runs. And it will eventually output this. As you can see, we've got grid lines here. We've got filters across here. This is the ideal final product. There are a few things that we do to the raw product, which is just includes on each of these tabs adding this filter line so we can filter down by our blanks and our X's to make it easy for our internal business partners. And then we also add, just generally, we just add grid lines across just for ease of readability. Let me see if that's created. It has. So the raw output is very similar, except it includes a few things that we usually delete. These excluded paragraphs tabs we cut out because there really aren't any, and it's just not functional for our purposes. If you do end up with exclusions, then obviously you would want to make sure that you keep those, but if you don't need them, we just delete them so that they're not distractions. And then just select them all, run all borders. And then it's just as simple as going in here, putting a filter on that line. And we're pretty much at the point where it's what the final product was. And that took, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes, not including upload of the files. So coming from, Jenny, what would you say, hours for one RFP run down to about 5 to 10 minutes, I think is a pretty solid improvement.
Yeah, I don't think you're far off there. Maybe 45 minutes to an hour at best, depending on how many documents are involved.
My head was around CIOS before with all the documents.
Oh, my word, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's really the long and short of it. We had all of these dictionaries before. Now, obviously, we do not have, we've just got this one now, which consolidated all of those dictionaries into one. Jenny, is there anything else that you wanted to touch on here?
I'm just thinking about it as you show the consolidated dictionary. This is a small point, but I think it matters a lot. When we send these out for a reconfirmation or ask the individuals who own the dictionary to update or edit them, I go ahead and filter it just for them. That way they don't have to wade through the consolidated dictionary to reconfirm or add or edit their items. It's a small step, but the consolidated dictionary is helpful to us. It's not necessarily helpful to our disparate reviewers.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I guess at this point, let's bounce back over to the slides real quick and can kind of wrap up. Make sure we get back to where we were. Jenny, back to you.
So looking forward, there are a few things that we have in mind that we could do to continue to turn the dial towards improved efficiency and quality. One would be a more regular routine cadence of dictionary updates. Honestly, that's a task that I own that gets overcome by events. So we know we do it at least annually. We know we do it real time when questions come in. But ideally, I'd like to be on like a quarterly cadence. And I think the only way to do that is to automate that in some fashion. The second thing is compliance. So there's no improved compliance with our response process requests, dates and distros. So when these review requests go out or RFP shred reviews go out, and this is sort of leading into the next bullet too, it would be nice to automate. So if I'm a reviewer, for example, and I've completed my review, I'd love to be able to like check a box so the proposal manager knows that the review has been completed from this individual perspective. We don't currently have that. We're operating in a way that we trust that our teammates are knocking that out. But as I said before, the volume is unpredictable. So I think that it may be helpful in the future just to be able to let those individuals, both for their own task management and for the quality control and compliance for the proposal manager, to be able to see who has or has not reviewed. And then that functional macro that Steve talked about, the purpose of that functional macro would be for to put in place those filters and the grid lines, so that that's just one more step removed from our manual task. So those are kind of our ideas for how to continue to turn the dial towards efficiency and quality. But I have to say, I'm really pleased with the way this happened, and VisibleThread was super supportive in terms of trying to understand how we were using the tool and why we wanted it to work a certain way. And we've, like Steve said, we've tried and failed on a couple of things, and then we've tried to rebuild in another way. But as I think about what was required to make this happen 2 years ago, this is just a dramatic improvement. And I don't want to diminish too much the shape of the email too. I think giving really clear instructions to our reviewers is a big, that's sort of a communication point more than a tool that helped us, but just giving that clear communication of, and Steve, we didn't show one of those emails.
I was just thinking that. Let me pull that up.
Ah, yes.
So this is the...
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jimmy.
No, you walk us through it. I'm not used to looking at things on a dark screen.
Oh, sorry. Probably difficult for folks to read too. So this is our shred email that we send out, and this is pretty straightforward. I'm going to zoom in for folks because I know that it's kind of small. It's pretty straightforward. Please see the attached shred for this opportunity and this customer. And this is a template that we keep in one of our other tools. Please reply only back, and this kind of talks to what Jenny said on detailed instructions, to the proposal manager and the BD lead by X date. They'll work with you to compose an actionable plan for each item. Your proposal manager will compose appropriate questions to be incorporated into the government question submittal. Those are due to the government no later than X date. And then down here where I'm highlighting is where we would list things that we want particular departments to look at. Legal, please look at this. Insurance, please look at these requirements. Security, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we leverage those, especially if there's like something that's hair raising about that particular bid, and we don't want that to get lost in the full. Don't dig through 4 documents to learn this. Heads up, we're going to have to hire 72 people. Whatever it is about the bid that's got people a little antsy, we call that out up front.
And so then if there are none of those, we do designate our individuals, and these are the named individuals against the various departments where the relevant dictionaries are. They have the various things that are critical and important to our review process. So conflict of interest and DE&I and things like that. And then we get down to the opportunity specific information where we talk about our opportunity number, due dates, roles, contract types, all the way down to, IT important information like, is this a CNI is this a CNI server, or are the computers GFB? And then kind of a brief opportunity overview and contacts. And that's pretty much it. And what we mentioned in the present state slide, the proposal manager for each opportunity fills this out while Jenny or I run the actual shred in VisibleThread. And that way we kind of attack the problem from 2 points at the same time, and hopefully save a little bit of time on it. Jenny, anything else to add there?
That's everything that I had planned for us to cover. I'm happy to answer any questions, or I'm sure you probably have more questions. I expect the questions may come around the tool. Steve, you're welcome to take those.
I always have questions. Really appreciate it, guys. Really helpful. Just to kind of kick things off, I want to go back to kind of the before times. So, seeing all these different functional reviewers, owners, et cetera, is it safe for me to assume that before you had this consolidated review of the RFP package, tax was going through all those documents on their own, finance was going through all those documents on their own, they might be control finding, reading through. The point is we're duplicating that effort and everyone's going through the same documents kind of in their own, within their own silos. Is that kind of how things were before you worked these dictionaries into the process?
Well, the dictionaries did predate me, but I will say that I think the way the dictionaries were presented, it was a lot to take in for any individual reviewer. So there was a lot of that control F activity happening, control find. And I think that if I put myself in the shoes of a reviewer who's going through the documents, let's imagine that there are 7 or 8 documents that came along with the RFP. It's quite likely in my imagination that they would get through some number of those documents before something popped up that they had to take care of. And then remembering where was I in that review and going back to it just diminished the quality of a review that we were going to get. So I do think that there probably was a time at CNI where there were no dictionaries, and that activity was all that was happening, was the control find and scanning and trying to get through all the documents. At the time I came on board, there was a set of dictionaries, but the presentation of the shred document was just really cumbersome to move through. So I think the improvements we've done in the last year and a half or so have been to simplify that review, allow the reviewer to just filter on what they want to see, give it a skim, and then jump into the document if that first little piece of the paragraph reads in the shred document that raises a flag, they can hop into they know exactly where to go in the document because that's what shows on the Excel output from VisibleThread. They know which document, which page, and they can go read that in context with what might be around it, might give them a better idea of what we need to do.
Great, thanks. And actually, just for the audience's awareness, for those who may be less familiar, a dictionary is a collection of keywords. And as you saw, Steve and Ginny are very cleverly using categories, which are groupings or buckets of keywords. So there'd be tax keywords, risky language you want to highlight, accounting, maybe we're looking for earned value management system. We're looking for government furnished equipment, property, things like that. So when you're hearing the word dictionary, it's those collections of keywords that we want to highlight wherever they're hiding in a document or a range of documents. So having kind of set the stage there, I get this question a lot. And then maybe Steve and or Emily, you touched on it, but maybe add a little bit more color around how you created a dictionary. So we saw that, those are great detailed lists of keywords. Talk to me a little bit about the genesis of that list.
Go for it, Steve.
Sorry, the list of keywords in the dictionary?
Correct.
So the list of keywords in the dictionary were created, and that kind of does predate me. Those were the individual dictionaries that I showed the kind of list of in the file view. So what we did was we consolidated those. Now, how those were created originally, I can't speak to, but Jenny, did we just ask our stakeholders who wanted to give us dictionaries and kind of go from there, or what was the process there?
Yeah, the origination of those dictionaries did predate even my experience here at CNI, but the refinement of that is something we've taken on ourselves. And grouping them so that we know what is relevant to the individuals who are named in the body of that email that Steve showed. So I don't know how that all got started. If somebody wants to begin from scratch with a dictionary, I think the best thing to do would be just to put a data call out. The folks that I work with on our legal team, if I were to ask them, like, what are the key words and phrases that would alarm you if you saw them in an RFP, that I think we would get a pretty good list back. So that's probably how it began. But to the part that Steve and I have played as we've leveraged the VisibleThread tool has just been to refine and organize the pre-existing dictionary that was already there when we came on board.
Great.
Yeah,
Thanks.
so the old SAIT dictionary, each of the categories would have been one individual dictionary, and now in the new SAIT dictionary, we just have used the categories instead of specific dictionaries. So all into one.
Right.
Yeah, and so then just as people are kind of thinking about this, that's generally pretty common in terms of, okay, I like to say, what keeps you up at night? Jenny, to your point, what scares you, what alarms you? And two, I encourage people to think about existing documentation as well. I was a contracts manager. We had negotiation playbooks, policy stances, things like that. There's a lot of places where you can derive some inspiration to put these together. And to your guys' point, iterating that consistently is obviously also important as times change. So I'm curious as well, could you share with the group, Steve or Ginny, so you have this great shred, you kick it out, your respective owners can filter to their respective areas of focus. What's the next step? I'm always curious about the timeline and the paper trail. So let's say I'm tax or legal for the sake of argument. I take this VisibleThread output. What do I do next?
So there are a couple of things. What we really point folks towards in the directions in the email is generating questions that will be used in our Q&A that goes back to the government. And that's where that's the most time-bound action that needs to take place, because there is a window where we can ask questions, and then there's a time when we can no longer ask questions. So we want to get that initial feedback, things that are critical to the bid itself. Let us know, let us compose a clearly stated question to post to the government within the stated deadline. But things do come up in the shred review that may or may not impact the bid, but may be really critical to operations and delivery. And for that, the proposal manager has a different tool that they use where they pull that information in. And that's a evolving tool that they use throughout the bid process. And then once that bid moves into source selection, that package of material goes to the owner of the LLC that we bid out of. And they're able to share that information with the program manager at award to say, these were critical points that came up during the proposal process. And here's some other things that were identified that we need to make sure we block and tackle on at award or post award and delivery. So keeping that continuity clean through, so we don't forget, right, what happens between the proposal effort and on into delivery is a big part of what we're working towards here. And it's a separate conversation. Those things that impact us in the immediate term during the bid effort, we have to deal with those first. That's our number one job in the proposal shop. Gone are the days when we can say, we'll win it, you guys go deliver it, good luck to you. So we try and give some clues for success, especially, and our contracts team also, I should say, they have access to the VisibleThread tool, and we'll often run a compare against that final contract to the RFP, just to see if anything dramatic has changed or shifted. They'll check that against what was identified in proposal that needs to be dealt with at delivery.
That's great. I think that's a really key point in terms of, one, winning is half the battle. We don't want a Pyrrhic victory in terms of we can win the business, but then operationally risks come to pass, margin erodes, schedule slips. So I think that's really important that this output is being shared downstream as well. There's a friend of VisibleThread who said that kind of VisibleThread outputs are the connective tissue between functions, between business intelligence platforms. And so I'm always curious about the route that these outputs go and how they don't just benefit the VisibleThread user, they benefit those who then have to deliver the business that you and Steve go out and win. So really interesting. And on the Q&A side, last question, and then I'll get into a few that are popping up. Jenny, you're talking about, quite rightfully so, that's time bound. It's really important. I've been a part of some Q&A instances where didn't have enough time to generate good questions, sufficient questions. Have you seen improved response time from the team, as well as just deeper, more thoughtful questions, because they are spending less time just searching for the requirements. They're here in front of us, and we can thoughtfully pose questions about requirements, what could drive risk downstream. Anything to add there?
Yeah, I think we probably have seen a bit of an improvement in the type of information that comes back. When I was going through the slides initially, I was saying that some of that reply all rhetoric, we've definitely silenced that. So we're not getting reply all vague references to certain sections of the RFP with no actionable so what about them. So that's huge and helpful. One thing that you may or may not have noticed when Steve was showing the email, that table of information about the opportunity, it identifies 2 dates. It identifies the date when questions are due back to the government, but it also has in big bold red when those questions or concerns are due back to the proposal manager. And that allows the proposal manager to work with the stakeholder in our shared services team to write a properly worded question, I'll say, a clearly worded question. There's a lot of art that goes into how we word those questions. You don't ask a question that you don't want the answer to, right? So we want to make sure that we compose those questions carefully. We don't ask a question that could paint us into a corner in terms of compromising our competitiveness on the bid. So we build in a little bit of a buffer time there. Now, sometimes the shredders, they may or may not stick to that deadline that we've set up, but if 75% of them do, that's a great help to the proposal manager in terms of creating those questions. So yes, definitely see improvement there, and I would credit that buffer window. We usually give ourselves as much time as possible, and we try to be really thoughtful about the time frame that we ask from our shred reviewers too. We know if they have another shred on their desk. We know if this is going to cross a holiday weekend, for example. So we try and give ourselves a little bit of time to digest what comes back, but we also try and give them a fair amount of time to review what's been asked of them.
If only every environment could be so judicious, Ginny. Excellent. Okay, I have a few questions coming in. This is a slightly different tack earlier in the process. So what you guys showed us today, the RFP came in the door. I have a question here. Steve, I'll direct this to you maybe. Is this helping you to decide a bid, no bid decision, or are you only deploying VisibleThread once that RFP comes in the door?
So I'd say probably a little bit of twofold here. We have a pretty good idea on the bid, no bid prior to getting the shred together, but with the risk assessment and the risk identification, it can drive towards a bid, no bid decision, especially once our internal business partners, legal, contracts, insurance, tax, et cetera, have a chance to weigh in and present other points of view that may not have been present in the qualification process that was primarily largely BD and executive leadership that may not have had the nuanced view that some of our business partners bring to the table. Is that about right, Jenny, in your experience? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say it's more of it can function as a no bid, flag for no bid. It's not something that we use to continue. Like we've decided to continue if we're running the shred. But that's what those little bullets in the email are for, of specific risks. Like, hey, these could potentially be showstoppers. Please don't fail to notice that this deal has these certain characteristics associated with it. And then there are things that the operations, business development, and proposal team might not be aware of, but that legal might suss out through their review. That they would come back and say, hey, we said we'd never do one like this again, guys. And here it is on page 78. So we have had deals come to a close because of the review, but that it's doing its job.
Yeah.
Excellent. Let's see. Next question here. Would you say that compliance and quality have improved? And so I'm curious, maybe looking at, well, let me just ask the question as it stands, and I probably have a follow-up. Would you say that compliance and quality have improved since you've worked this kind of dictionary shred into the process, including that email?
I would say that from a compliance perspective, the proposal managers have other tools that they bring to bear to confirm that we're being compliant with every RFP requirement. But I think that from a quality aspect, definitely. I mean, this is a way of flagging things that may be of concern to our shared services team members. And that gives us the opportunity in proposal to write very specifically to what we will and won't do in that environment that's been given to us through the RFP. So I think that's a higher quality proposal then, right? If you're able to speak very pointedly to specific aspects of the delivery environment and be clear about what we can and can't do that the customer is asking us around. So yes, definitely on a quality side, but compliance, I think there is definitely a way to use the VisibleThread tool to maximize compliance, but for the purposes of this shred review, compliance is sort of a parallel item. Would you agree with that, Steve?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think I'm trying to think how this helps us include or improve compliance. And the only thing that I can think of is bringing in stakeholders to identify parts of the RFP that as proposal managers and BD folks, we may not think of necessarily, but will cause compliance issues. So maybe regulatory compliance versus proposal compliance.
Great, thanks. I'm curious, does Chickasaw have some kind of risk register that you'd populate and review kind of as you're moving through the proposal cycle? We might kind of include management reserve, things like that. Is that relevant, and would you be using this output that we're showing to help drive and populate that risk register more comprehensively?
I'll start this response, and Steve, you can pick it up, but you just brought back a wave of memories around the C4IS. Yeah. Help me here. C4. CIO, that's where I went wrong. Yeah, CIO SP4. That, how many modifications? There were so many modifications, and 16. I just felt such a burden of risk in terms of the judgment calls that we were having to make about how to respond to the contradictory and ambiguity in the various proposal documents and modifications, that drove us to create a risk register or stated assumptions. And in the stated assumptions document, we would say that this is what the RFP said. This is the worst case scenario that could be an outcome because of it. And here's how we're choosing to handle it in our proposal response. And then there was actually a status column after that, because throughout the many modifications on that bid, some things were reconciled by future modifications and some things were further complicated by future modifications. It was just, it couldn't have been a bigger mess. But that is that document that we created in response to that environment became a tool in our toolbox. So when we have ambiguity and requirements and RFP information, we have a way to document, these judgment calls that we're having to make in proposal, because that's never the sexy thing, right? To like sit down with a C-suite or your VPs and say like, hey, if I put a comma here or an and here versus an or, it changes the way that we are obligating ourselves. Like nobody wants to review it at that level of detail. So the solution we came up with was we're just going to write down what we think and what we're doing, and then we'll pass that document over for review and approval before we submit. I don't know, how did I do with that, Steve? I feel all the feels just remembering.
Yeah. We probably agonized over that document maybe more than we agonized over the actual RFP response, to be honest. But it was really helpful and critical, especially after 16 modifications, 3 of which came after like a 4 or 5 month gap. It was helpful for us to go back and look at the document and say, why did we decide to do this again? Because 4 or 5 months after we submitted it, we looked back and we were like, hang on, this is weird. This doesn't feel like how I would do this ordinarily. Surely there's a reason. And in fact, there was, and we had written it down in this risk register.
That's great. And, this is a perfect segue into another good question that just came in. Identifying risk is such a function of having a deep understanding of the requirements So, just the way you've worked this into this process is very, very interesting. And I have this terrible habit of traumatizing people on the line in terms of risk registers and CISP4, but it's important. There's been pain. The stakes are high. So on the requirement side, we've spoken, around regulatory, tax, finance, et cetera. When you're doing these shreds, are you shredding for kind of technical requirements as well for maybe a solutions architecture type team, ideally driving then towards actual technical risks surrounding delivery? Is that part of your guys' process?
Steve, well, I'll kick that one off too. The dictionaries have been created through those regulatory offices in our shared services division. I think the breadth of services that Chickasaw provides is so wide that I don't think we could, and maybe I'm just having a little cop-out moment here, but I don't think we could create a dictionary across, because it's not just the 6 different practice areas in which we operate. There's also a market, various markets for each of those practice areas. So what we do is we depend on our subject matter experts and our operations team, as well as our business developers who've been driving that deal from the beginning to catch those types of things. Maybe that's something we should tag on that future state. There probably are a small set of gotcha phrases that we could pull into a dictionary from a SME perspective that would be, our SME in our IT practice, for example, may say, "Ooh, if I ever see this phrase or these words, I know that's not a fit for us, or we can't operate profitably in that zone." It's probably worth asking that. But for today's use of the shred, it's strictly on the shoulders, or is a benefit to those shared services. And those are the tabs that we have in the workbook.
Great.
And I would agree with that.
Sorry, Steve, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that there's so much nuance around the various piece parts of our technical solutions that I don't know, without more of an AI dive into the technical solution itself, if there would be a way to make that a feasible shred from the model that we use right now.
Understood.
If we could
Emily,
train the system to tell us what the risks are, then that's probably a different conversation.
That can go on our agenda for our next session, Emily.
Yeah. Absolutely, yes.
Machine learning and AI. Yeah.
4th of July.
And just something to think about too, and understood, it's so context specific. You guys have a really strong, kind of shared services regulatory focus. For those on the line where maybe those technical risks and requirements are a little more standardized, something to think about where we can pull out, technical and those regulatory compliance focused risks, thinking about how we could use dictionaries to help us do that. And I'll use a legal example, but I think it's still relevant to the technical side of the house as well. When you're doing such a wide kind of range of work, services, et cetera, it definitely can be a little daunting. I encourage people to think about the problem children, for lack of a better word. So I've been working with some legal teams who do a lot of state and local work. As you can imagine, there's 50 states. You can't just have one state and local dictionary. We need to be state specific. And so, there's 50 options. Well, we drill down into, which states trip you up the most, or maybe you do the most business with. So, we do tons of contracts with Texas. We'll start with a Texas dictionary. Mm-hmm. Or, Louisiana civil code, comes from Napoleonic law. That's very different from the common law. We'd have a Louisiana dictionary because that's just kind of a weird one that does trip us up. So there's just ways that you can make it a little more palatable as we're thinking about this, but definitely want to think about risk from a regulatory and a technical delivery side. So understood. Appreciate your thoughts there. I'd say other than that, Emily, quick question for you. Steve and Ginny obviously have a really thoughtful, systematic approach to how they're reviewing these documents and how they're interacting with other functions and groups. Any observations or best practices that you've seen working with Steve and Ginny that you'd like to share with the group?
I suppose I could lean on the VisibleThread perspective in terms of Ginny and Steve. What is great about our relationship is they understand it's a two-way street in terms of partnering with VisibleThread to try and get as much value as possible from VT Docs. So really spending the time, like investing time into learning as much as you can about VT Docs, and of course spending the time creating that dictionary, really great dictionary, and trying to get as much value as well and save time for other teams too. And also what Steve and Ginny do like fantastically is feedback to us on the platform and how we can improve, so that I can share that internally, and then we can improve the user experience for customers throughout VT Docs. So that's just from the VisibleThread perspective in terms of what I think Chickasaw are great at doing in terms of partnering with VisibleThread.
That's great. Well, we don't have any more Q&As coming in, so to those on the line, continue to use that area. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to poke at here. It's been a really interesting discussion. I love a good story. So Steve or Ginny, whether it's from the Q&A period, you mentioned one of those situations where we're never going to bid this again. Any kind of horror story you'd like to share with the group, and maybe a lesson learned, and maybe this dictionary, the shred, could have helped avoid some of those minefields? I think those can be powerful stories or parables for the group too.
The thing that comes to mind for me, and I touched on this when we were going through the slides of the prior state, was just the peace of mind for that proposal coordinator. Like what an unhappy ask to ask a single individual who was the lowest woman on the totem pole for the team to shoulder that burden that had to be conducted after hours, that wasn't generating a solid product. Like, I think that if there's drama in this story, that's probably where I felt it the most. We'll set the CIO SP4 bid aside for a second, but yeah, I felt for her, and it just prompted that thought of like, there's got to be a better way. This isn't high quality. This isn't efficient. This isn't fair. This isn't right for the employee either, and it's not right for the risk reduction practice that we're trying to achieve. So that was really the impetus of how to approach things in a different or better way. And that actually was, we were already trying to do better when Steve Skeldon joined us. And if you can't tell, he has a much more technical aptitude than I do. So bringing him in, like, he doesn't mind breaking the tool. I'm afraid I'm going to break it and it's never going to be usable again, and we're going to fall off the edge of the earth. But Steve just walks in guns a-blazing, and he breaks it, and he talks to Emily, and they fix it, and they fix it better. And then before I know it, I've got a one-click solution. So I think between the two of us, it's a good partnership in terms of optimizing the tool. I don't know if you have anything more material, Steve, in mind about how maybe we've solved a problem through this method.
No, I think the biggest problem that we solved was the time it took to run it, to be honest with you. I think that I'm sure that if I went back through shreds, I would find something that we pulled up. You know what? There's a recent one where we ended up no bidding because of this, but the security shred came back and they said, hey, you've got to have top secret clearance, and we don't have that. And even if we did have that, we don't have the ability to store. And even if we did have that, we don't have the SIPRNet drop. And even if we did have that, we don't have XYZ. So they were able to identify pretty quickly a lot of things that our BD person hadn't really looked at beyond we have to have a clearance. So that was, I think, a success story in avoiding a risk of putting a bid in, spending time on it for something that we wouldn't have been able to execute legally.
Yeah, that's so important. In terms of being able to, you mentioned the pain, and it's unfair to a proposal coordinator, where we don't want to spend our time on these opportunities that wouldn't be winners. And if we were to inadvertently win it, the black helicopters are going to show up on your lawn. So I think that's really interesting and important. Similar, actually, question just came in on the same vein. Ginny, you mentioned that proposal coordinator after hours, unfair expectations. The question is, was the proposal coordinator running a tool or kind of going through that process manually? I know when you joined, VisibleThread was in place, but do you have any kind of extra detail on the before days to add there? running a tool or doing this manually?
The team had used VisibleThread historically, and then they had moved to a different tool when I came on board. I think the method with VisibleThread initially was in need of great improvement, and then when they shifted to a different tool, that tool was also an added complication. So she was using the dictionary. She was using a tool that is like VisibleThread, but it wasn't VisibleThread. But then I think like the biggest thing wasn't really the tool or the dictionaries. It was the fact, to Steve's point, it was the time. And she was having to run every single document that came out with the RFP had to be run through 12 dictionaries. So if you imagine that there's, let's say, round number 10 documents that are released with the RFP, maybe you decide that you really need to shred only 7 of those. Great. But you have to do 7 documents through 12 dictionaries. And it was just such a time suck for us, or for her, that it just wasn't a fair ask. So while she had the building blocks of efficiency, they just weren't put together in a way that allowed the task to be done efficiently.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And ultimately, that's a really interesting point, is right. It's not just a tool or a solution alone. And, shout out to Emily in terms of helping you guys work through, okay, this is what we're doing now. It's not ideal. Let's optimize this so that ultimately, whether you're doing a shred, 1 dictionary, 10 dictionaries, that we empower employees, whether they're on the proposal side or the operational delivery side, to free up their time to think strategically and, do that value add work that they're paid to do. So I think it's a very human story. And yeah, just freeing up our time to, spend time on good work, good proposals, ones that we're in a position to win and deliver profitably. So let's see. Cool. Well, that is the last question that's in the Q&A box. I think we can give everybody some time back in the day. Really appreciate Steve and Jenny, you guys taking the time, sharing your thoughts. A really interesting way you're using VisibleThread, but ultimately solving a universal business problem or helping to solve. So really interesting. Appreciate the time. Emily, well done in terms of partnering with Steve and Jenny. I've really enjoyed the discussion. And like I said, for the group, the slides and recording will be shared with all who registered. And I'll just leave it for any parting thoughts from the group, but that's all from me.
No, I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for being good partners, and thanks for the opportunity to tell the story. I hope somebody else can make good use of our experience.
Yeah, thank you guys very much. We really appreciate the opportunity and looking forward to continuing to work together here for many years.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.